Respond News, dispatches on the hidden threats to democracy.
Welcome to the first episode of Respond News, dispatches on the hidden threats to democracy. I'm Manuel Delia from the Respond project, and together with our expert guests, we will explore the latest updates on research into the grey areas of interactions with power. Lobbying, political financing, media influence. Whether through backdoor deals or legal loopholes, we must ask, who is pulling the strings? And how can we make holders of public office more transparent and accountable? How can we protect democracy from corruption? In today's episode, we explore how tech giants are influencing and in some ways reshaping democracy in Europe. In recent months, several events have demonstrated that some tech companies are doing much more than selling technology. They are actively lobbying EU policymakers. While holding a prominent role in the US as part of Donald Trump's task force on reducing government spending, Elon Musk made headlines for his controversial involvement during the recent German elections, raising serious concerns about the spread of election-related misinformation. Musk took a highly public stance, expressing his support for the far-right Alternative for Germany and utilizing X, the social network he owns, to amplify his messages. In Italy, the government has signed a €1.5 billion deal with SpaceX, Elon Musk's space company. This deal focuses on telecom and security services. Yet many experts and opposition members in parliament question the safety of a European nation depending on an American private company for such critical infrastructure, and the potential influence the world's richest man may exert on Italian democracy. The cross-border influence of big tech extends to much broader levels and involves various actors. Following the 2022 Qatargate corruption scandal, which resulted in several members of the legislature being arrested and investigated in Brussels, the European Parliament has suspended Huawei's lobbying access, citing bribery charges related to the Chinese company's lobbying operations in the chamber. These developments have intensified discussions about Europe's dependence on foreign technology. European data is primarily stored on US cloud services, with companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google owning over 2/3 of the European market. Under President Donald Trump, the US administration is threatening to impose significant tariffs on Europe and many other countries, including China, which could impact the hardware and software sectors. The EU, for its part, isn't taking this lying down. Under the Digital Markets Act, European officials are threatening hefty fines on major US tech giants like Meta and Apple. These moves could seriously impact tech markets, potentially disrupting the flow of goods, raising business costs and escalating a trade war. Today, there is a growing call within the EU to reduce reliance on foreign companies and invest in homegrown technology solutions to achieve the so-called technological sovereignty. But is this truly the right answer to the increasing influence of tech companies on democracy and the operation of our institutions? What if the real issue relates not only to foreign technology companies, but also to how power and consequently corruption transcends borders? To help us explore the roots of this influence and its implications for our democracies, I'm joined by Fernanda Odilla. So, Fernanda Odilla, Junior Assistant Professor at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the University of Bologna, and she's also heading the work package on the Respond project on cross-border corruption. So actually my first question to you, Fernanda, is, isn't corruption something that happens within borders? Why cross-border corruption?
So thank you for having me here. And I think that for many years, we dedicated a lot of time looking at corruption within countries. And of course it exists, but every day now we see a piece of news here and there that suggests that it's not always the case. We do have people connected And we're talking about a globalized world where people move and corruption also moves. So what we're trying to understand is how exactly, which are the enablers of this movement. There is a very interesting story that we can discuss, that is influence of foreign companies in third countries. This has been happening for a long time now, but what we've been discussing over the years is that company X goes to a country Y and eventually bribe officers to get contracts, for example, or to expand business. But we do have a very interesting case from the 70s that kind of suggests us that corruption can be also used for foreign influence. And this is something that academics start talking right now, especially with a concept called the strategic corruption. That is exactly this, the use of corruption for foreign influence, but it's not new. So the case I'm talking about goes back to the 70s. In 1972-3, Salvador Allende, who was the president of Chile, he came public with accusations, very strong accusations, against a US company, ITT, International Telephone and Telegraph. Also a big tech company at the time. Of course, in the 70s, there was no social media. ITT had business in Chile, and Allende came public to say that they funded using slush funds, so illegally, his opponent. And this became an international case because he brought the case to the United Nations. And it was not just him accusing a company or another country trying to influence domestic politics, but he made that a case of we need to treat corruption as a global issue. A topic that now we are again starting to talk about.
Have we learned nothing in these 40, 50 years?
Well, I think we missed a lot of opportunities, to be honest. We lost some of them. In the case, Allende started this movement, and in the UN, in the United Nations, they tried to create, for example, a code of conduct for big corporations, for multinationals. They started this conversation, and this thing has never been put forward. To be fair, OECD has some guidelines for doing business abroad, but we started this conversation, and this conversation was interrupted by two things. One, unfortunately, Augusto Pinochet, the head of the army in Chile, led a coup against Salvador Allende, and Allende was taken out of power, and he ended up killing himself. On the other hand, the US led a movement in which they immediately passed the FCPA. That is a legislation that punishes companies, in this case, American companies in the beginning, then they slightly changed a bit the design of the legislation to punish companies that bribe abroad.
FCPA stands for?
Foreign Practice Corruption Act. Then the US started trying to convince other countries to pass similar legislation. It's curious to note, and it's important to note, that one of the first acts that Donald Trump took in his second mandate right now was suspending the enforcement of FCPA. So by now it's in standby as we talk. We are in April 2025. But going back to your question, we had this opportunity to discuss at least a code of conduct for big corporations or multinationals. And we stopped, and for decades, corruption has been treated often as a domestic issue or a national issue. We lost a lot of opportunities. And now we've been seeing different episodes of, again, big tech corporations, but not only them, but them right now are kind of gaining the headlines for several reasons. For example, there is an ongoing investigation conducted by the Belgian police, and they are investigating a big Chinese company, tech company, and that allegedly used practices like revolving doors, that is the swap between public and private jobs, or sometimes people occupying positions at both at the same time, and lobby practices that, let's be clear here, this is not corruption per se, but they can be used as mechanisms to at least promote undue influence. So I wonder if we had passed code of conduct, if we had advanced these discussions on what a company can do and cannot, how to punish a company that tries to use mechanisms that or can be related to corruption or can be considered undue influence. What if we had better mechanisms to curb it? If we would have investigations like that, scandals that emerge here and there.
You are speaking about undue influence, not exactly corruption in the conventional sense, in the sense of cash in a brown envelope, but practices that can lead to public policy decisions taken in the interest of the people exercising this influence. Can we call these gray areas?
Yeah, and that's exactly what Respond does. We look at the gray zones, the gray areas of corruption. Academics, they do not agree with a definition of corruption, but what we've been seeing a lot is that we do have various practices that are legitimate, part of democracy, and I'm saying lobbying, when you advocate for your cause, for your beliefs, for your interests, is part of democracy. In many countries, this is regulated. And when you do something out of the regulation, then it can be considered illicit. But the thing is, we have several practices that operate in this. It's not entirely illegal, but they are there exactly in what we call gray zones. Exactly these practices that are not entirely legal, but they are used to benefit individuals, their groups, their families, at the expense of the others. So when you unbalance the game, the access, the influence, then we start having problems because you are being unfair.
And if it isn't fair, it isn't democratic, right? So this influence really breaks down a democratic society, doesn't it?
Exactly, and but this is something that we are also trying to understand with Respond, because we don't know exactly, and that's why we are conducting different types of research to see how these practices that operate in the gray zone are perceived by citizens. If they are perceived as just the game as it is, if they are perceived as corruption, if they are perceived as unfair, and how it damages or compromises the quality of democracy. Because, you know, corruption is a hidden crime. It's very hard to measure it. And especially when you arrive in the gray zone, people can perceive it differently.
Fernanda Odilla from the Respond Project, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, and I hope to come back soon.
Respond News. Dispatches on the hidden threats to democracy.